I mean, this sounds like mind-blowing to people. How have you not paid taxes and stayed out of jail?
Because I'm simply following the law, because there is no law requiring to file and pay federal income taxes to begin with. It's a deception, it's the lie.
This is Rick, the Wealth Coach, and today you're going to learn that taxes are voluntary and that paying taxes is a voluntary act. You do not have to pay income taxes. It is not mandated that people have to pay income taxes. It is absolutely, positively voluntary. All right?
The very functioning of the federal government depends on the American people's willingness to voluntarily pay the taxes that they owe.
There is no law, and to date, nobody has been able to show that there is a law for the average American citizen working day in and day out to pay an income tax.
13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States. These are involuntary taxes. So of course, we can say they're involuntary servitude, but let's look at the definition of servitude. Involuntary taxes, you lack the liberty to determine the course of your actions or way of life. Something, my money, which is my property, owned by me, by one person, is subjected to a specified use or enjoyment by another. The government comes in and says, no, that right there, that your money right there, we're going to now subject that to a different use. We're going to now enjoy that in a different way.
But every American, if we're going to have voluntary compliance at the high rate we continue to have in America, it's got to be perceived as a fair system.
You can go to jail, and more precisely, federal prison, for failing to file your required tax returns. And there have been people who are sitting in prison right now for failing to file their required tax returns.
Our voluntary tax system depends on our taxpayers trusting that it works fairly.
They gave me 26 weekends in the county jail, which I've completed. And now I'm on probation for 5 years. I pled guilty to one count of willful failure to file. And I told the probation department when I had my interview that I was a Quaker and that I did what I did because of conscientious objections to war.
The First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. By taking money involuntarily from people and then using that stuff on things that those people have no say in, you're violating that person's religion. By our taxes funding things like abortion and war, it's violating all those religions that are against murder, that are against war. What if there's a pacifist religion that's saying, hey, you know what, I don't want to be funding war, I don't want to be funding death and destruction. By taking that person's money involuntarily and funding these things, you're violating that person's religion. That person is no longer exercising their religion freely. You're actually directly making this person violate their religion.
We believe also that lack of congressional support for the IRS could adversely affect individuals' attitudes towards participation in our voluntary compliance tax system.
There is a crime of failure to file taxes or file tax returns. That is a federal misdemeanor, and in theory, you could go to prison, federal prison, for up to a year for each unfiled tax return.
Wesley Snipes gets 3 years behind bars. He was sentenced Thursday on misdemeanor tax charges.
The most important measure to me is the voluntary compliance rate. Going forward, are they voluntarily compliant as opposed to what they did in the past?
You have to understand that an agency which will unlawfully impose a tax that doesn't exist is not going to care. If we, the people, don't know what our rights are, they're not going to tell us.
But We the People Foundation for Constitutional Education put a full-page ad in the USA Today on July 7th, 2000. And within the body of that ad was a $50,000 challenge for anyone that could show the law. And to me, $50,000 is a lot of money. So I went after that and did the research based on the fact that I thought, let's put this baby to bed. I'm hearing all these rumors. You know, I'm going to kill 2 birds with one stone. I'll answer these people's questions that are asking me, and then I'll win this $50,000. And, you know, based on the research that I did throughout the year 2000 and that I'm still doing, I have not found that law. I've asked Congress, we've asked a lot of people in the IRS commissioners, helpers, they can't answer, because if they answer, the American people are going to know that this whole thing is a fraud.
The very functioning of the federal government depends on the American people's willingness to voluntarily pay the taxes that they owe.
Reality star couple Julie and Todd Chrisley reported to federal prisons. Todd in Florida to start serving his 12-year sentence, while Julie went to Kentucky to begin her 7 years. The pair convicted last year of tax evasion.
What is the purpose of an audit conducted by the IRS?
To hopefully make sure that people, when they are voluntarily complying, are complying with the statutes.
To me, voluntary compliance is really the name of the game, because enforcement is so expensive. So you want people to feel that the agency is using its power legitimately.
So the 16th Amendment says, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes. The part that we are going to be paying the most attention to are these first couple of words. The Congress shall have power. Okay, so the 16th Amendment is clearly granting a power to the federal government, specifically a power to Congress. Okay, now let's show exactly which amendments this is violating. Okay, so now the first thing it's violating is the 10th Amendment. Let's look at the 10th Amendment. So the 10th Amendment clearly says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. The purpose of the 10th Amendment was to put a cap on the federal government's power. After the 10th Amendment, the federal government is not to receive any more powers. To understand why the 10th Amendment is most definitely a cap on government power, to be able to better interpret the Constitution than the Supreme Court, you have to understand where these things came from. You have to understand the history of the creation of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We have to now go back to the Anti-Federalists and understand why these amendments came about. The legislative power vested in Congress by the foregoing recited sections is so unlimited in its nature, may be so comprehensive and boundless in its exercise, that this alone would be amply sufficient to annihilate the state governments and swallow them up in the grand vortex of general empire. So clearly, this line here, this section that I've just highlighted here, is talking about the power vested in Congress. Okay, see, that's actually a complaint the Anti-Federalists had, was that the power being given to the government with the Constitution is basically unlimited. If you have a faction that takes over the three branches, they can do anything. They can pass any law. And this is why the 10th Amendment came about, because the Anti-Federalists saw through this bullshit. And they're like, no. We need an amendment that will address this. We need an amendment that will put a cap on the federal government, that will put a cap on this government being created. So it says here very clearly that no law shall be passed to restrain the legislators of the several states from enacting laws for imposing taxes except imposts and duties on goods imported or exported, and that no taxes except imposts and duties upon goods imported and exported and postage on letters shall be levied by the authority of Congress. The 10th Amendment, which was a cap on their power, was supposed to say, no, you do not get to tax us on anything else. You do not get any more power than that. And the fact that the 16th Amendment starts off by saying that, we're authorizing power to the Congress, boom, right there. Okay, so you're violating the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment clearly says you should only have the power that's in the Constitution, and all the other powers, even if they're not listed anywhere, shall go to the states or the people respectively. So here's what the 14th Amendment says. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Now, I'm going to show what the 16th Amendment violates is the deprivation or the depriving a person of life, liberty, or property, because money is a form of property, and they're doing this without due process of law. Now, there's a difference. Without due process of law does not mean without due process of legislation. Okay, due process of legislation and due process of law are two different things. What this means is that they cannot deprive you of life, liberty, or property unless they have proven in a court of law that you have been guilty of a crime. Okay, then they can deprive you of your liberty. They can put you in jail. If there is a law of, execution, they can then also deprive you of life. And if they have shown that you have broken a law to unjustly achieve that property, like, kind of like civil asset forfeiture laws, where they have, if they can prove that you sold drugs, they can like seize your assets to due process of law. So this does not mean that they can create a law through legislation that can deprive you of life, liberty, or property and then be okay with it. No, that is not a justification. That is not what this means. So right there, though, the 16th Amendment is violating this. It is depriving us of property without due process. And yes, money is property.
Today, the IRS sold nearly everything out of his home. KATV News Watch 7's Melissa Fry was there as hundreds of items were auctioned off and hauled away. Melissa?
Well, Brandy, today some of Randall Thompson's most prized possessions pulled out of 5 storage sheds and sold. We saw furniture, appliances, and most notably sports memorabilia signed by some Husker football legends, and even a boxing glove with Muhammad Ali's John Hancock.
65, anybody $65 bill, anybody 65.
One man's treasure, now somebody else's.
Look at all the stuff you lost.
Bart Starr, Gail Sayers, Dick Butkus, Paul Horning.
Floyd Patterson glove.
And check this out.
Muhammad Ali's gloves, which is one of the greatest guys alive.
Seen online for nearly $2,000, the glove goes to Mike Merrill, who bid $600. He's giving it to his daughter.
Some kind of a present, birthday or Christmas or something.
Lucky girl.
So, 20 bidder number 1.
Also feeling lucky? Dave Davis. He spent more than $6,000, but says he could probably furnish a whole house with his purchases.
I got a bunch of friends that know that I do stuff like this, so they're always, what do you got, Dave? What do you got?
The appraisers actually tell me this is one of the biggest auctions they've had in the Omaha area in some time.
Money from this sale will be applied to Thompson's debt.
Absolutely very sad.
Rely on voluntary compliance for our tax system, but we have systematically undercut the ability of the IRS to deal with voluntary compliance.
Will the IRS show up at your home and then kick you out on the street? Will they take your car and sell it at auction? What about your bank accounts, retirement accounts, investment accounts? Are those at risk? Technically, they can seize any of these things. If you don't pay, the tax lien automatically comes about to secure the government's right to collect the taxes owed. Just know that if you haven't paid your taxes, the lien exists. Now, this is not to be confused with a notice of federal tax lien. The NFTL is filed at the local county courthouse in the county where you live. According to your most recent tax return, the NFTL is public information and could have a huge impact on your financial life. The purpose of the notice of federal tax lien is to put the public on notice that the IRS has a priority interest in all of your property and could seize that property at any time to cover your tax debt.
Our voluntary tax system has been a model for the world.
These united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states.
Garland's tax debt in New York totaled $4 million in 1964. The IRS ended up foreclosing on her home, forcing her to spend years traveling from hotel to hotel before eventually dying of an accidental drug overdose in 1969.
Integrity of the nation's voluntary tax compliance system depends on a modernized IRS.
The IRS's own admission in their own Bible, their own manual, says that their reach, their jurisdiction is limited to Americans living and working abroad. The average American living and working in the United States is not made liable to pay the federal income tax.
So it literally says in the code that as an American, you are not liable for paying federal income tax.
Well, it's absent. In other words, all of these other parties are made liable.
So what did your supervisors say? You presented them with this information. Hey, everything that we're doing on a daily basis, going after individuals who aren't paying income tax, our job is kind of not really relevant. What did they say to you?
Well, in a nutshell, I gave them a letter. So I wrote down my basic concerns, and I said, I'd I basically said I'd really appreciate some assistance here because I've spent the last 2 years, doing this investigation. I did it on my own time. I didn't ask for, I didn't do it on government time. But I really have some serious concerns. I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. You took the same oath. I went through all the Treasury guidelines of, what you should do when you encounter fraud, waste, or abuse. So I just followed the rule book and approached them. And of course, they looked at me like I had two heads. I didn't go to the media or anything. I just wanted some assistance. If I've taken a wrong turn, if I've somehow done something, untoward, but I mean, here's the evidence I gathered. Here's how I gathered it. The IRS trained me, right, on how to be an investigator. So I just used the same skills, the same training. But they basically, for about a week, nothing happened. And then I was called into what today is called the Special Agent in Charge, or SAC, called into his office, and he said, "What I'm about to tell you, I've been instructed to tell you." And he told me that he basically got the word from the Assistant Commissioner for Criminal Investigation back in Washington, D.C. So that guy answers to the commissioner. And they told me that they wouldn't be addressing any of my concerns and that they would provide me with the paperwork necessary to tender my resignation. So I had to leave a very high-paying government job, a pension, leave it all. And so I believe what I'm saying.
Because our tax system relies mostly on voluntary compliance.
So November of 2004, both my client and I were indicted on 4 federal felonies. At the trial, the IRS put on an expert IRS agent who had, I think it was like 27, 28 years experience. And the IRS agent couldn't point to a single false statement, entry, anything. And the special agent, who I used to work with when I was at the IRS, who ended up investigating me, and spent about 3 years investigating me, and he was put on the witness stand to testify to any evidence of a conspiracy that he found. And he testified that he couldn't find any evidence of a conspiracy. I have it from a very good source that the special agent actually recommended that I not be prosecuted, that he spent 3 years investigating me, couldn't find any evidence, put it in his report that that was the case, evidence of wrongdoing, of breaking the law. And then the DOJ and the IRS prosecuted me anyway. So at the end of it, the jury, I think they were out for 3, 4, 5 days, quite a long time for a tax trial, and acquitted me of all the charges.
Our hearing demonstrated how our system of voluntary compliance has come under assault.
The American Revolution was a tax revolt, but it wasn't a revolt over the amount of taxes. It was a revolt over the power to tax. So why were our forefathers so fired up over this one particular grievance? No taxation without representation. Influenced by the Great Awakening and Enlightenment ideals like natural law and individual liberty, the colonists would not stand for being taxed without their consent anymore.
The colonists weren't simply against taxation. The lack of representation was the key issue. Without a voice in Parliament, they felt their consent was being bypassed. This, they argued, transformed taxation into theft. The government entrusted with protecting their property was instead taking it without their consent. Locke further argued that when a government violates the social contract by abusing its power, the people have a right to revolt.
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government.
And historically, we've had a high compliance because it's been voluntary compliance. Everyone believes they're being treated fairly under our system, but that's no longer the case.
If Americans just learned that the IRS was actually knowingly deceiving them, that would be enough for them to rise up and put a stop to it.
100% of what is collected is absorbed solely by interest on the federal debt. all individual income tax revenues are gone before 1 nickel is spent on the services taxpayers expect from government. People have been told, that you need this income tax system to fund government, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, my question is, well, if that's true, how did we fund government from 1776 to 1913?
The main purpose of the income tax is not to raise revenue, but to redistribute wealth and to control society.
A lot of people might say, well, gee, if there wasn't an income tax, what would happen to education? They don't understand that education is paid for the most part, out of state and local taxes, your property tax. People might say, well, how are we going to build and maintain our highways? If there's no money coming into the government, we need our highways. There is a tax on every gallon of gasoline that people buy. Proceeds from the income tax do not pay for highway construction.
I believe that in both spirit and substance, our tax system has come to be un-American. Death and taxes may be inevitable, but unjust taxes are not.
This small booklet includes the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence. This is a document that every citizen should read. It's a document which freed an entire nation. This is the Internal Revenue Code, and this document and the unlawful application of this document by the Internal Revenue Service has enslaved the nation that this document attempted to free.
Tax resistance is a form of protest designed to illustrate a sense of displeasure with the expenditure of one's taxes for something the taxpayer finds morally or fiscally objectionable. Various populations have consistently used tax resistance against their rulers for over 1,000 years. It's worth noting that tax resistance is technically breaking the law, thus leaving the protesters vulnerable to fines and even arrest for tax evasion, so it's one of the more legally risky forms of peaceful protest against the government. In conclusion, we have to return to our first question. What would happen if everyone stopped paying taxes?